The day we set our wedding date, she got so happy she drank too much. Her friends asked her to list 8 memorable moments with me. Of the stories she told, 5 weren't mine. By the time Nancy finished the 8th one, her friends were all clapping, saying how much she must love me. I just stood there, forcing a smile. No one knew my hands were clenched into fists under the table. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. When she told the first story that wasn't ours, I unconsciously bent one finger. By the end, my whole hand was a fist. Statistically speaking, I'd lost to some other guy. She was still drunk, clapping along with everyone else. In a moment of deep emotion, her eyes met mine. For the first time, I realized I'd never truly understood her. Amidst the teasing from others, she leaned in to kiss me. I gently pushed her away, saying, "You've had too much. You reek of alcohol." Or rather, I finally understood. Our story had someone else's shadow in it. The first story she told that wasn't mine was about kissing in a downpour. That was something we'd never done. I've never found doing anything in a downpour romantic. I even think only idiots would stand there kissing in the rain instead of finding shelter. And this idiot, drunk, had mixed up her memories of me with some other guy. She didn't notice anything was wrong, just figured I was shy in front of everyone, and that's why I refused her kiss. I sat there, drinking glass after glass of water, making excuses to go to the restroom multiple times. After I don't know how many trips, she finally noticed something was off, even through her drunkenness. She took my hand and asked, "Grant, what's wrong? If you're not feeling well, we can go home now." I remembered the second story she told that wasn't mine. He said he wanted to see me, so I pulled out my 4 and went to him. Honestly, I find that kind of romance really childish. That kind of impulsive passion is for late teens or early 20s. Back then, maybe that kind of gesture could somehow prove you're my everything. But for me, almost 30, it just seems ridiculous. One person, knowing the other is on and 4, still says I want to see you, and the other, knowing it's probably just words, still risks everything to go. As she pulled me towards the exit, I watched her. She'd led me by the hand so many times. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one behind that figure. After I took her home, I drove off. When I left, I also took the wedding invitations from the coffee table. It was the design we'd finally settled on after so much discussion. That was a time we were both racking our brains over something that was truly ours. When we finalized it, we both felt so proud that our little ideas had come together. But tonight, she hadn't mentioned it at all. I sat on the steps where we often had our dates. It was also where we first met. Back then, I was tired from reading and was resting my head on my knees. She was coming down the steps, saw me, thought I was unwell, and asked if I needed help. She mentioned this one. Her coincidental act of kindness won my heart. When it came to fate, I guess I was luckier. She even chose this spot to confess her feelings to me. Back then, she stood up, said she had something to tell me, and friends suddenly appeared from all directions, their phone lights shining to accompany her confession. She asked me, "Grant, will you be my boyfriend?" We walked down the steps hand in hand. I remembered the flowers she'd just given me. I'd left them there. When I turned back, I saw tiny joy cutouts stuck all over the bottom of the steps. I turned to look at her. She asked triumphantly, "Pretty amazing, right?" She mentioned this tonight too. She said, to confess to him, I spent half the night putting up those joy cutouts. That was one of the few times friends were involved in something between us. After she said it, many people chimed in, "Yeah, I remember that," praising her for putting so much effort into me. That's what I thought at the time too. She woke up once, groggy, and called me, asking why I wasn't home. I said there were some things I didn't know how to handle, so I went out for a drive. She said she wanted to come be with me. I heard her getting dressed and told her to stop messing around and go back to sleep. I said, "I'll be back once I figure things out. It won't take long." She advised, "Grant, don't waste your energy on things that upset you. There's always something else to focus on, something that will give you a positive response. When you hesitate, you're just making yourself suffer." I asked her how long it took to prepare for the proposal that night. She said about 5 or 6 hours. "All right, Then I'll make my decision in these next 5 or 6 hours. She called my name and told me, "This feeling is so good." She asked, "Grant, planning the wedding feels so good, doesn't it?" But this wasn't one of the things she'd mentioned in her list. It felt like there were too many regrets unspoken between us. The friend who was recording edited the video of Nancy and sent it to the group chat. It was the early hours of the morning. Most people were asleep. A few scattered congratulations popped up on the screen. Nancy was sound asleep and hadn't seen it yet. I clicked on it and watched it again. And once again, I heard the third thing she said that wasn't mine. I fed him undercooked food once, and he ended up in the hospital with food poisoning. As she said this, her hand was still holding mine, her thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. Her shame and heartache lingered even now. Everyone was laughing at her cooking and her devotion, and I was the only one in the crowd who knew the truth. It was like I was forced to experience firsthand how she once loved another boy, like watching a specific detail of their relationship. It was an innocence that belonged only to them. But from the moment Nancy and I met, these kinds of things were never issues. We met each other as mature individuals. The innocent her that I could never touch. She had given that part of herself to another young man. Forever. And now she was reminiscing about him. I think I was really stuck on this. That's why I was still wide awake at 3 or 4 in the morning. The shock from the 8 things she blurted out still hadn't completely worn off. I don't think I'd ever considered the shadow of a third person between us. Our relationship had moved smoothly from dating to marriage, a natural progression. Now it seemed it wasn't so peaceful after all. It's just that she was good at hiding things, and I was never very observant. That day when I noticed those joy cutouts, Nancy even asked me, "Where was your attention? I worked so hard on this and you almost missed it." But it seemed she wasn't as careful as I'd imagined either. That night, I watched her for a long, long time, but she didn't realize I was scrutinizing her. My eyes that night definitely didn't hold 100% love. If there was anything else, it was probably shock and a sense of being wronged. But she didn't read any of it. The fourth thing she said that wasn't mine was, to get him to forgive me, I practically worshipped him for a month. I was always amazed at how she could bend over backwards like that when she was younger. We never resolved our issues like that. Most of the time, we aimed to deal with unpleasant things quickly. We'd calmly analyze the cause of the problem and figure out the root of the conflict. It seemed like almost any problem would be resolved within a day. If she was wrong, she'd admit it. If I was wrong, I'd admit it. But now she was telling me she wasn't always so clear-headed and rational when dealing with problems in the past. At this point, I couldn't even say anymore that these were things only childish people would do. I think I started to envy them back then. They had a love that was impulsive, yielding, open, and passionate. I had to admit, I was comparing her past with her present in my mind. I was trying to find a winner between the two. Even though I'd already lost once in the 8 stories she told, I was still stubbornly searching for an answer. The 5th thing she said that wasn't mine was, he wanted me to model for him, to wear that short skirt he loved, the one I always thought was too revealing. Watching on my phone, I laughed out loud with the crowd for the 2nd time. Tears started streaming down my face without me realizing. When I was there in person, I could still hold it together, refusing to show any discomfort. Now, alone with no one around, I didn't care if the nearby streetlights that had witnessed my triumph also witnessed my defeat. The 3rd thing she said that was mine was, in our new house, I asked him, should we go get our marriage license in a few days? I finally realized where the difference between us lay. The 3 things that were mine marked each progression in our relationship. But the 5 things between them were everyday moments, almost mundane. And it was precisely these small, continuous moments that permeated every aspect of life. So much so that even when he wasn't there, he was everywhere. I had to admit I lost. At 5:30 a.m., a few more scattered congratulations bumped the video to the top of the chat again. After reaching my conclusion, I didn't have the energy to watch it a 3rd time. I knew the more I dwelled on her brief words, the more stories would emerge. And this 2nd viewing had already forcibly ripped off my mask. It felt like I was forced to compare myself to a man from her past. And I lost again, this time to her devotion to him. Her words made me realize that what I thought was 100% of her love was actually only 3/8 of it directed at me. I never had the upper hand in the little things, the day-to-day details. That's why, with me, she only remembered the decisive moments. In the quiet of everyday life, my presence was always fainter than that of the one who made her constantly challenge and break rules. It was with great sadness and pain that I concluded she didn't love me that much. She called me at 6 a.m. She didn't ask why I wasn't home yet, but instead, "Grant, where are you?" The time bomb in the group chat had finally exploded after she sobered up. I asked her, "What are you panicking about?" "Grant, you've been out all night." I got up. The night hadn't been a complete waste. At least, after seeing the truth, I finally knew what choice to make about this upsetting situation. She said she was coming to get me and accurately guessed where I was. I didn't try to stop her. The moment my mind stopped racing, exhaustion hit me. More than trying to dissuade her, I just wanted to sleep. Good thing I brought my ID when I left. This time, it was her turn to look at the 8 things she said and try to guess what I'd been thinking all night. I only turned my phone on after I woke up. Messages and calls from Nancy kept popping up. Nancy really wasn't one to overshare about her relationships. So, in our relationship, her friends had only really appeared that one time to witness her proposal to me. They knew nothing of the happiness or friction between us. Naturally, they knew very little about her past relationships too. So, those 8 things she said, her friends naturally assumed they were about me. And that's precisely what led to today's mess. They were busy celebrating. We were busy breaking up. In a way, that video in the group chat became the damning evidence against Nancy. She couldn't delete it. Everyone had seen and heard it. She didn't even have the chance to claim she was just drunk and talking nonsense. It was too coherent from beginning to end. The story started with me, detoured through them, and was supposed to end with me. I don't know who was whose shadow in all of this, but no one can stand having someone else's shadow in their love story. Her way of thinking still followed our old patterns. She told me avoiding things wasn't the way to solve problems and asked me to come out and talk to her. Of course, we needed to talk, but I had to recover from a night of exhaustion first. We had too few memorable places between us. So much so that after searching around, she ended up waiting for me at those same steps. I wonder if, while waiting for me, she carefully weighed the significance of every word in those 8 stories. Heavy, my 5/8 of hurt. We sat side by side, just like that year when she asked if I was unwell and then sat beside me, quietly telling me she could help. She didn't try to make excuses for what she said last night, but straightforwardly admitted her mistake and apologized. She said, "Grant, I'm sorry. When I get drunk and confused, I can't control what I say. Besides sleepiness and sneezing, what else is truly uncontrollable? Uncontrollable love, unstoppable longing." So I said, "Nancy, I'm letting you go. Since she has someone she can't forget, I'll let her go see him, instead of being by my side, loving me while missing someone else. Or maybe I'm not even sure if she loves me anymore." She grabbed me, telling me, "Grant, that's all in the past. We're good, everything's good. Don't throw it all away because of a few words." She even said, "I've been loving you well, too. If I don't drink anymore, this won't happen again." I looked back at her. I didn't understand how she could be so earnest yet so hurtful. She wanted me to play dumb. But the truth she'd poured out, I'd gone over it again and again, looked at it from every angle, and then despaired so much I couldn't sleep all night. How could I choose to forget? Next, I went through a hasty and chaotic broken engagement. Both sets of parents were judging the chances of reconciliation from my every move. I sat there, motionless. Nancy reached for my hand under the table, and I slapped it away. I cursed at her in anger, and then her parents started yelling at her. The scene was a mess, until Nancy's parents said, "He died in that car crash a long time ago. What's gotten into you now, causing all this drama?" Then Nancy started crying. I left everyone at the table and fled the scene. I took some leave from work and drove out of the city. Nancy always said she was a bad driver, so she always sat in the passenger seat. Most of the time, while I was driving, she'd be beside me, constantly reminding me, "Be careful, watch out for cars suddenly appearing beside us." Maybe she was saying those words for him. Thinking about it, I started crying again. Just like she couldn't bear her parents mentioning that car crash. And I couldn't bear to think about how many of someone else's shadows she had woven into my story. She found me 3 days later. I was lying on a deck chair in the yard of a small farmhouse, sunbathing. She blocked my light. I opened my eyes and looked at her. She smiled at me and asked if I'd calm down a bit. I never had any secrets from her. I even told her about my secret getaway spot. As a result, now when I wanted to hide from her, she could find me easily. She skillfully grabbed a stool and sat down next to me. A gentle breeze was blowing. She said, "The scenery is beautiful, the atmosphere is so comfortable." Just like the first time she set foot in this place. Constantly exclaiming in admiration. I brought her here as a reward for the elaborate proposal she'd planned. That day, I drove further and further out. As we left the city, she asked for the first time where we were going. I said I was going to kidnap you to my village and make you my wife. She burst out laughing and, making a surrendering gesture, told me, "Why bother kidnapping me? I follow you willingly. Grant, wherever you go, I'll go." When the car entered the village, she didn't ask again where we were going. She obediently got out of the car with me, and as we walked along the village road, she held my hand, until the owner of the guest house waved at me from afar. When I pushed open the main gate, I said to her, "Nancy, welcome to Grant's world." I had always enjoyed the tranquility of this village alone. Like guarding a treasure, I had discovered myself. Now, I had brought her here myself to share it all with me. Back then, she also said, "Grant, see? I delivered myself to you." We spent a wonderful evening that day, walking back and forth along the country paths several times. She thanked me for showing her a different side of things. But she didn't mention this that night either. When she woke me, I realized I'd fallen asleep, warmed by the sun. My only bad experience in this place is that I'm a mosquito magnet. She was dabbing bug spray on the welts, one after another, and that's what woke me up. She asked if I wanted to go inside. Then she pointed to my exposed legs and arms and told me, "This is a big job. It'll take some time." I refused, took the bug spray from her, poured some into my palm, and carelessly smeared it on my legs. She sat there watching me do a sloppy job. Then the strong smell of the bug spray made me wrinkle my nose. She offered to help me apply it again, and I refused again. This time, she stood up and started swatting at the annoying mosquitoes. When I looked down, I saw she had placed a lot of mosquito-repellent things under my lounge chair. It seemed just like the previous times we'd come. She always came prepared, and every time I still got my legs covered in bites. The first time she applied it for me, she even made herself laugh. Said she'd never seen anyone mosquitoes loved so much. Then she stared at me and said, "No wonder the mosquitoes like you. I like you too." But she still stood up and mercilessly swatted those mosquitoes. She teased me, "Can't let them get away with bullying my person right in front of me." That day, we both couldn't stop laughing watching those mosquitoes. Mosquitoes bit me. She hunted them down. A mosquito landed on my leg. She, afraid of hurting me, swatted lightly, and the mosquito escaped. I blamed her, and she looked all aggrieved. Finally, she just carried me into the house, then went out to wage war on the mosquitoes. We jokingly called it our mosquito guerrilla warfare. Every summer when we came here, we'd say, "Let's go to battle." But she didn't mention this either. I only said my first words to her after dinner. I asked her, "Have you arranged a car to leave the village early tomorrow morning?" She asked when I was going back. I told her lazily from the sofa, "No rush. I've taken my annual leave. I'll stay for a while." She went out, made a call, and came back to tell me, "I've taken leave too. However long you stay, I'll stay with you." I told her to go get her own room from the owner, but she said she could just sleep on the floor in my room. I asked if she wanted a drink. She looked horrified, waved her hands dismissively, and told me, "I've quit drinking." That was quick. She said, "Grant, don't worry. Something like that will never happen again." She still didn't understand what I was really upset about. That night was a drunken slip of the tongue, not drunken nonsense. Everything she said was true. It's just that too many of them were stories about her and someone else. I was just sad that it was at our celebration dinner, after she got drunk, that she finally made me see her love was actually for someone else. I asked about that man. The moment I mentioned car crash, her face turned deathly pale. I asked, were you driving when he had the car crash? She shook her head and told me, he was driving by himself. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit him. By the time I got there, he wasn't breathing anymore. She stumbled over even these few sentences, taking several deep breaths. So, it was only then that I understood why she was afraid to drive and couldn't bear to hear the words car crash. That man died when she loved him the most. And those detailed memories were precisely the result of her replaying them over and over in her mind. Otherwise, how could she not remember the trivial things that happened between us? When she postured as if to talk things over, I lay on the sofa with my back to her, again refusing to communicate. She said it was something from over 10 years ago, that I shouldn't take it to heart. She frankly expressed the surprise and stability I brought her. She said, Grant, I truly intend to spend my life with you. She also made it clear that as long as I forgave her, everything could go back to normal. My little tantrum over these 2 days hadn't caused any major impact. The congratulations in the group chat were still trickling in. It seemed only a thank you from us, the involved parties, was missing. She started bringing up things that happened between us. How I waited for her downstairs at her office with an umbrella in the rain. She sent many messages urging me to go home first, but I insisted on waiting. How she'd cooked many home-style meals for me, spoiling my appetite for anything else. How my social media handles all included her name. She said, Grant, we were really in love before, weren't we? That sense of being wronged extends to this day. I tear up just thinking about it. I asked her, if you have so many memories, why didn't you mention them? You've cooked for me many times, but you only remember that one undercooked meal. Nancy, I'm the one who's been wronged. Only I know if you deserve forgiveness. I brought up that 3/8 share. Nancy, what makes you think that 3/8 of what I want from you is enough? I did a midnight escape. After waiting until Nancy fell asleep, I tiptoed out. After hearing what I said, the thing she said most was I'm sorry. I didn't need her superfluous apologies. I couldn't define whether this relationship involved deception or not. Maybe, like she said, she was also doing her best to be good to me. It's just that her best couldn't be 100%. But I insisted on that 100%. When she chased after me, I was already close to where the car was parked. She chased, I ran. Even something as exciting as this, I figured, wouldn't even rank in her memories. Like the time she had a fever and I took care of her all night. She kept telling me how much trouble I'd gone to. She didn't remember that night either. She never remembers what we did together. But I always remember what happened between us. It's not fair. She reserved a large space in her heart for someone else before loving me. That's not fair either. If someone asked about our story, every single one of my memories would be about her. That's even more unfair. As long as I love her, this unfairness will always exist. I'd already proposed a way to restore fairness, but she didn't accept it. Our continued silence eventually caught our friend's attention. Her friends asked me out to talk, but when Nancy showed up, her friends made excuses and left. I heard her friend tell her, "Girl, this is as much as I can help you. Whatever it is, just coax him a bit and it'll be fine." When a woman wants to please her man, who cares about face? She quickly looked back at me, and I was looking at her too. That night, she passed off her stories with someone else as mine. Now, no matter how hard others try, they'd never guess the root of our conflict was this. They were even suggesting she recreate those stories for me. When she sat across from me, she asked where I'd gone afterwards. Said she'd been to all our usual spots but couldn't find me. I said, people always have secrets, right? Just like I have my secret base you don't know about. You never told me you were always longing for the past. She apologized again. Her apologies had little effect on me. I just felt it was good she didn't try to argue, or perhaps, By speaking so confidently in front of everyone that night, she'd left herself no room to argue. She just told me, "Grant, believe me, I really do love you." I listened to her words, frowning. People always try to solve problems by saying I love you when they're most in the wrong. I asked her, "If you love me, how could you tell so many stories about him in my story?" It was evening when we walked out. Just like before, she unconsciously gazed at the sunset glow. Then she pointed to the sunset and told me, "My favorite time of day is when the sun sets." She said, "I'm so lucky. I got to see the sunset and meet you." Once, when we were traveling, we kept getting lost because of the terrain. She pulled me to sit on a nearby bench. She said, "Let's wait." Wait for what? Wait for the twilight to give us the answer. So the two of us sat there quietly, welcoming the sunset, watching the sun go down. As night fell, she held me and kissed me. A sudden, natural, passionate kiss. She said, "See? Isn't this what traveling is all about? Being with the person you love, doing anything, anywhere. It's not about going to those checklist spots just to take a photo." It pained me to only now realize that at some point in the past, she had done similar things, said similar words to another man. Such a copy-paste. I lost to the original version. Belatedly, she called to ask about the wedding invitations. She asked me, "Do you know where they are? I've looked everywhere at home, turned the place upside down, but I can't find them." I said I took them. She asked if she could come get them, said she wanted to see them. The day I brought them home, I had that dinner party, so the invitations were just left on the table, and I didn't get a good look at them either. I never got a chance to really look at the physical copies. I threw them in the trash when I went downstairs that night. The fruit of all our brainpower and hard work met a tragic fate the moment it went from a digital file to a physical object. If I had the chance, I'd want more than anyone to keep them, write our names on them and send them to everyone. I said again, I threw them in the trash. She was silent, seemingly unsure how to respond to that. She understood better than I did how angry I must have been to do something so drastic. Throughout her drunken night, she never knew how I watched her, bit by bit, show off how she once loved someone else, and then thought about how she loved me. I couldn't help but start comparing, constantly dwelling on those 5 things. I also wondered if I would feel better if I were the 5/8. Thinking about it carefully, probably not. I couldn't accept her not loving me 100%. I couldn't be part of her past, so she could have loved others, but she couldn't still be in love with someone else. In my world, there should only be my story with her. No one else's shadow should fall upon my story. She told me she'd found a way to solve the problem. "Grant, maybe we can try again." Try what? I'll tell our 8 stories again. Or even 10. I promise they'll all be about you. I finally understood what desperate measures in a dead end looked like. This childish, laughable, speechless-making solution of hers, I don't know why I would even give her this chance. Blurting things out unguardedly is completely different from a well-prepared, eloquent speech. Maybe after she woke up and saw that video, she started brainstorming things about us. If we're counting from that moment, I could also list 100 things about us. Small things woven into daily life. You could find traces of us everywhere you looked. It's just that they weren't said then, and to specially say them now seems unnecessary. To save her the trouble of carefully sifting through our stories to filter out the ones that aren't ours. Making her rack her brains, putting her in a difficult position. I asked if she remembered that video I showed her of a groom calling the bride by the wrong name at their wedding. I said, "Nancy, you know? Back then, I just thought how embarrassing it was for that bride. For everyone there to know the groom didn't love her. But after experiencing something similar, I feel it was more sadness than embarrassment. To be happily discussing marriage with me, yet in your heart, love someone else. Nancy, if we continue, we'll have a day like that too. Then everyone will be standing there laughing at me, instead of today, where they're in the dark, and I'm the only one who's aware. And since I already know you don't love me enough, why should I wait until then to be reminded by you again that you don't love me? Hurting me once is enough. I'm sad too. I'm just forcing myself not to lose too badly." She repeatedly denied it, saying it wouldn't happen again. She said, "Grant, I'll be careful." But if even saying, "Grant, I love you" requires being careful, what's the point of this relationship? Loving me isn't from the heart, but a result of forced awareness. It would only make me realize how much of a failure I am. How pathetic would I have to be to desperately love such an imperfect woman? I also understand that life is full of spontaneous moments, and she can't be consciously aware all the time. Even if she quits drinking to avoid future slips of the tongue, there will always be other times, like when she's groggy in the morning, looks at me and calls me by the wrong name, or when she sees a beautiful view, points it out to me, and again calls me by the wrong name. I can't be bursting into tears every time, accusing her of not loving me attentively. Nancy never announced our breakup. The group chat remained quiet. The last message, looking forward to the wedding banquet, was particularly ironic. Everyone tacitly stopped sending congratulations in the chat. The silence of the two main characters had already said it all. I quietly left the group chat. Maybe I was just fooling myself that by doing this I could leave that video behind, a problem for that group, not me. I always feel that if I try hard enough, one day I'll forget this. Forgetting is the only way to have a new beginning. When the wedding venue called me, I found out Nancy hadn't contacted them about a refund. I gave them Nancy's number. When I went to inquire about the menu and prices back then, I wasn't sighing like this. I meticulously planned everything, only to see the truth behind the fog at the last minute. However happy I was laughing then, that's how miserably I cried later. Fortunately, as long as you're clear-headed, it's not too late. In mid-June, I braved the scorching heat to go to a local festival. Covered in bug spray, wearing a mosquito-repellent bracelet, I squeezed through the crowds. Last year, I promised the old man who makes sugar figurines that I'd come again this year. Today, I came to keep my promise. He looked around and asked if my girlfriend didn't come because she was busy with work. Last year, Nancy was busy shooing mosquitoes away from me and dabbing me with bug spray from time to time. The old man even said, "Son, you two seem really close." This year she wasn't here. The old man thought of many reasons, but didn't think of a breakup. I said, "We broke up." Then, feeling the mood was too heavy, I deliberately whispered to him, "Sir, I'll come again next year. If I bring a girlfriend, please don't mention this one." The old man, while shaping the sugar, said, "Of course, I wouldn't just say anything." I heard Nancy calling my name. I turned my head and looked for a while before I saw Nancy walking through the crowd towards me. Just like last year, her hands were full of mosquito repellent stuff. She looked at the bites on my legs and she said my name, Grant, very pointedly. "I'm late," as if to tell me she wouldn't make that kind of mistake again. She suddenly brought up how we found a lost phone last year when the festival was closing up. After the owner called, we waited there. We waited for who knows how long. But that evening, a breeze picked up, and we sat under a tree, enjoying the cool air. The nearby vendors were coming and going, packing up their things. I pointed to my leg and told Nancy, "I just looked it up. They say pinching across on a mosquito bite can stop the itching." I asked if she wanted to try. She again faced the dilemma of force, afraid of pinching too hard and hurting me, or too lightly and just scratching the itch. After the owner retrieved the phone, we walked towards the intersection where we parked. She suddenly hugged me. I asked her what she was doing. She said, "I'm hugging the sunset glow." I mumbled, "Yeah, the sunset is yours and I'm yours too." She looked at me, as if waiting for my response. Such a ridiculous, subtle thought. I asked her, "If you can remember it after all this time, why didn't you say it that night? Could it be that you and he also watched sunsets so you don't remember ours?" "Nancy, I knew it. If you'd had a chance to tell a ninth story that night, it still wouldn't have been mine." She wanted to explain, but I didn't give her the chance. I quickly ran ahead. I randomly hopped on a bus. The bus swayed along, taking me to another part of the city. The sunlight lazily fell on my face as I looked out the window at the world outside. In the buildings we passed, I saw shadows of me and Nancy. I really liked a certain brand of clothes, and after I got together with Nancy, I often dragged her shopping with me. She was different from other women. She never complained about being tired. I'd be in front looking at clothes, and she'd be behind me saying, "That looks good. It would definitely suit you." When we came out carrying bags big and small, I'd blame her for not stopping me. Nancy will never save any money like this. She'd say, it's okay. I'll work harder to earn more, try to keep up with your spending pace. At a street corner, a young couple in front of us mentioned a nearby shop had a new, delicious item. So the two of us sneakily followed them all the way. When they looked back at us, we'd pretend to be looking up at the tree branches. So they walked faster and we followed faster. When we finally got the food, we ate and couldn't help but laugh. Nancy asked me, see? For this bite to eat, we got mistaken for stalkers. Grant, being with you, I've really done everything. 2 blocks later was that bridal shop. Nancy was waiting there, waving at me. She said she'd found something good to share with me. After work, I took a bus here. She pointed to a wedding dress on a mannequin in the window and asked if I liked it. She said, Grant, should we try being together in a different status? See, the bus isn't even halfway to its destination, and I've already remembered so many things about us. We also had childish, laughable, memorable moments like theirs. Things I can remember without even trying. She didn't think of a single one. I also feel it's a pity we broke up, but I can't convince myself to try and accept it. The pain from that day lingers even now, undiminished. Whenever I think of her, I remember her behavior that night. Truly disappointing. At the bus terminal, her friend was waiting for me. The reason for our breakup leaked out after a conversation Nancy's parents had. People had differing opinions, some agreeing, some opposing. Some, like me, felt such humiliation was hard to swallow. Others thought I was being too petty, throwing away years of relationship over one incident. She came to see me, of course, with an agenda. She also agreed Nancy was wrong that night, but she still felt Nancy and I might have a chance. I asked her, who sent you? Nancy? She shook her head and told me, Nancy's parents. They really like you and asked me to try and persuade you. Grant, that man is dead. He's not a threat. Truth be told, I never saw him as a rival. He died a long time ago, we'd never even met. Nancy was the one who brought his shadow into my world. And I knew, the living can't win against the dead. I don't waste energy on battles I'm bound to lose. She looked at me and said, Grant, give Nancy a chance. Okay? Then she took out her phone and called Nancy. She said, Nancy, right now, tell us 8 things about Grant. Perhaps afraid Nancy wouldn't take it seriously enough, she added at the end, Grant is here listening too. Then we heard Nancy say, wait a sec, followed by an endless silence. See, this is what I mean by accidents. Asking her this question without any preparation. Even if she had memorized and rehearsed at this crucial moment, she still needed to calm down and think. And her friend only asked for 8 things about me. Even things like what I like to eat, my style of dress, my license plate number would do. But she still couldn't come up with a single one. I just knew that what came to her mind subconsciously wasn't about me. A minute later, she started with the first one. Grant said he wants to go play in the snow this winter. Her friend cursed at her. Damn it, Nancy. In the time you hesitated, I could have come up with something about him. Nancy, you deserve to be dumped. One day, I came across that skit online where someone calls out the wrong name while picking up food for their partner. I had also imagined this scene happening to me and Nancy. When the fantasy became reality, I felt more relief than sadness. If this counts as a euphemistic way of expressing I don't love you, I can accept it now. There are thousands of ways to solve a problem. Either let a mistake ride, or cut your losses in time. The last thing Nancy's friend said to me that day was, Grant, maybe people who are aware will suffer, but they won't suffer forever. Just like now, when I think about those 8 things, I'm starting to feel like it's not such a big deal anymore. The comments under that skit were all variations of, run. Don't make me force you with a knife. My first reaction that night was also, run. Run as far as you can. It was far from being petty. It was because I knew my own limitations. I was far from capable of salvaging the situation. I allowed her to love me, but I couldn't accept her carving out a small piece of her heart for me and calling it her whole truth. And I believe I have the ability to meet someone who can give me their whole heart. If choosing her makes me miserable, she shouldn't be my only choice.